Started. All right, all. Well, welcome. Take a deep breath, Dan. Yes. Get into the spirit of this. Let me first just talk a little bit about why the setting change here and why I'm surrounded literally by all of the stories, the poetry, the imagery, the memories that I try to gather together in this space that help me craft a meaningful life. Right? There's not just one book up here. There's not just one story. It's a multiplicity of moments and stories and reflections, poetry that are able to allow me the opportunity to drift into this experience of life tethered to a myriad of insights, perspectives, wisdom traditions, moments, and memories. We're all like this, right? We're all surrounded by all of this in our lives. And we use it to craft meaning as we move forward. And that's really, what the religious experience is about. In fact, I was thinking about Karen Armstrong this morning when I was reflecting on the words of the person I'm going to share with you today. And Karen Armstrong reminds us that really humankind are sort of wired, right, to seek meaning. I mean, she says right at the opening of the book, we are meaning seeking creatures. And that is, we're not just engaged instinctually, although we are driven by some of that, of course, in our DNA, but we are crafting a kind of poetic awareness that allows us to engage the world. And you can just see that at play in so many different ways in our time and throughout the centuries. I was blessed this week by getting a note in the mail by one of the folks who log on to this time together. And the note was a clipping from an article called Rereading Poems. It was a suggestion that you pick a piece of poetry and then you reread it every day for a month and allow that piece of poetry to sink down inside your soul, right, and sort of find place there. And with every reading, you're going to discover something new about the piece of poetry. And it hit me that that's really what I want this time to be at this moment in time, is this sort of rereading the poetry of each other's lives, right? I think there is something about not just trying to craft meaning from the people in our past who shared their wisdom, or even the religious figures from the past, but being present for each other so that every story becomes a piece of poetry that I can hold on to, that I can cherish, that settles into my own existence, and then allows me some capacity for either orienting or maybe even reorienting, to finding a new couple of steps down a path that I wouldn't have taken otherwise. Whatever it happens to be, that those stories are like the poetry that allows me to continue to draw the perfect circle that is my life unwinding and unfurling in the world. So thanks to Joan for sending that along. It's a beautiful piece, and I'll share a little bit about that in the weeks ahead too. So a piece of poetry to get started. Take a deep breath, and I think this piece of poetry kind of captures a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. This is not the full poem, it's just the start of a poem. It's the beginning of a poem by Drew Dillinger called Hymn to the Sacred Body of. And I'm just doing the intro because I want to kind of invite you to remember or reflect about what is the nature of your piece of poetry that is coming together as you journey into life. And to know that as your life story, like all the stories around me, is added to this collective conversation that it is a way in which we find our spiritual selves and our grounded selves. A hymn to the sacred body of. Let's meet at the confluence where you flow into me and one breath swirls between our lungs. Let's meet at the confluence where you flow into me and one breath swirls between our lungs. For one instant, to dwell in the presence of the galaxies. For one instant, to live the truth of the heart. That this entire traveling cosmos is the secret one, slowly growing a body. That this entire traveling cosmos is the secret one, slowly growing a body. How can you and I slowly grow a body together, individually and collectively? Let's see what we can do today, shall we? As I have shared with you, it is my objective in this time to reach out to people I know who are seeking greater depth in their spiritual lives, finding ways to construct meaning, looking for practices that might help them orient or create windows or doorways that they can go through to widen their perspective. Those are the kind of people I'm trying to talk to. And you might be one of those people that I talk to too along the way. And my goal is to interview them, to have a conversation with them, to try to really hear them, to hear their story in a way that I can at least try to capture some of the essence of that story. And then to share that wisdom collectively with you. And the reason I'm doing it is because it's two, really. One is that I think that if we're going to practice a spirituality in the now, right? If we expect that, well, how are we going to understand God? We've talked about this. Is going to show up in this moment because that's all Spirit does, or God does, or the source of life does. I mean, it's here, present now, right? It's happening now. That to listen to stories in the moment, I mean, real lives now, is in some ways a revelation, a disclosure, a unfurling of what's going on in our collective lives at a kind of a deep soul level or spiritual level, and that we can find some wisdom for the way ahead in these conversations. The second one is because I don't always want to be the one talking at you, right? I want all of the collective stories to be shared. And I know we can't do that in a room together, so this is the room that I'm going to try to do that in. And so gathering these interviews, I'm doing both a reflection at the 9 o'clock time of what I've discovered in those conversations, and then trying to put together a podcast that's going to help us as well. So let me begin. This last week, I had two amazing conversations. I'm just so grateful to the people who offered to be present and to be vulnerable enough to share their story. One was a college student, a junior, senior in college, about 21 years old. So our 21-year-old shared his perspective of where he's at this moment. And then I met with someone who's at the other spectrum, end of life spectrum, an 87-year-old gentleman. And he shared the wisdom he's gleaned along the way with a gaze back, at the long trajectory of his life story. And I want to begin with just the kernel of his perspective, our 87-year-old. As I sat with him at his kitchen table over a cup of coffee, after reflecting on, 87 years of a full, life, every breath, the billions of heartbeats that he's experienced, I ask him, how does he get in touch, with his deepest sort of spiritual self. His sense of how he understands soul unfolding in within, and within the world in which we find ourselves. And while he understood that for many in the religious experience, finding a way to be compassionate is a huge piece of the religious puzzle. And he understood that as well. He said, there's something beyond compassion that's calling me deeper into life. And for the 87-year-old at the kitchen table, the heart of the religious experience that beats fully is that moment when you experience being deeply connected. That idea of being connected. For him in that chair, he said, I need to be connected to you. I am changed in my connection with you, and vice versa. I am changed or transformed when I am deeply connected to the world around me. That connection is a reality that exists and holds the wonder of the universe. It's nothing that I have to manufacture. It's nothing that I have to make happen. It just simply is. And I only have to sort of sink into it with an awareness that allows me a depth of gratitude, a sense of place and perspective, a rich sense of almost like joy-filled connection, or what would you call it? Almost like this. It's almost like he's part of some greater flow of how everything is woven together, like a living flow. And that's how he would describe it. And to be honest with you, his words have been percolating within me for the last few days, and I too am trying to wrap my soul around what that means to think about my primary religious understanding is my capacity for connection. Maybe, connecting to my own soul and gut and experience of life, connecting to others, connecting to the natural world, connecting to mystery. It's all this big connection. How are we all connected? And then this capacity to move beyond the allure of kind of transactional relationships that can happen very speedily, right? So that I can navigate my way through the world and never really connect with anyone. Never really connect with the natural world. It's like sometimes when I'm hiking in the wilderness, Lori, my wife, will slow us down. and I'm hiking with this objective to get to the next spot, and then she slows down to be more present for the experience. And in that moment, right, all of a sudden I have a richer sense of connection to the environment that's holding me. Our 87-year-old, John, we'll just use John from here on out, says that you got to be able to slow down, be vulnerable, hear and experience the other person in a deep and intimate way, to know where they're at right now, and to feel this flow, this energy between you that binds you, that connects you, that is the almost like the tether that connects you together and connects you to everything else. It's this like a web of life. We're all so deeply connected. John would even say that from his perspective, religious practices like going to church every Sunday are really about trying to find, this kind of longing to connect with others, to find a community that you can connect with. He says, he wasn't even sure that it mattered that you do it in church. You could do it at the bowling alley, in a card club. You could do it collecting bottle caps, but we're all wired to awaken to the way we're connected. And that was the wisdom John is sinking into in this moment and trying to explore and express. A beautiful way to think about how spirituality might manifest in the simple awareness, just the awareness of the wonder of our connection to each other. John shared as well that that longing for connection could be traced all the way back to his early years when he was 21. And he went out on his own kind of pilgrimage, that journey we all take in search of the Holy Grail, that experience of leaving home and taking out on the hero's journey, right? Trying to find yourself and where you fit into the world. And you don't even know exactly what you're looking for, but you take that journey hoping that you will be drawn into some greater clarity. And for John, that journey led him at 21 to know the power of connection. And that early, almost intuition has been percolating throughout his entire life, that now he has this bold way of joy-filled embrace of how to connect with others. And he practices it every day, and obviously practices it even across the kitchen table. Next week, I want to explore a little bit of his understanding of how he talks about moving beyond just listening to someone, like, are you hearing me? to really hearing somebody, hearing their story. He's got a different way of seeing that as a pathway into connection. I'll share a little bit of his insights with you about that next week. So thanks, John, for those thoughts for today. John's on one, on the mature end of this journey. I got a chance as well to meet with a 21-year-old who's in college, junior, maybe senior. You never know when you're in college, right? And I was really impressed with the kind of way he articulated, for him anyway, his kind of vision quest that he is on, right? He too is trying to parse or hang on to all of the pieces of wisdom and insight from stories of the past and experiences in the present that would help him craft a meaningful life, an expanded life, a life just beyond the self that feels like it's got weight to it, right? He's on that journey, and it's just spectacular to be able to hear him articulate at his young age, at 21, how he's finding his way into that journey. A couple of insights that he shared, and his name is Cole, so I'll use his name as we move forward. One of the things that I thought was spectacular about Cole is that he articulated this journey and this approach to this journey not as a kind of a panicky route to figure it out, which frankly sometimes defines my journey. Where you're kind of frantic and going forward. Cole has learned at a young age already how to be more gentle about the journey. In fact, he used words as we talked about kind of not driving your way through life, but almost falling into life. Like you're falling deeper. You're not managing the momentum of this thing, but life brings you things as you fall into it, and then and it can be scary, but you're falling into something. And what are you gathering along the way as you're drifting more deeply into life? A little bit like I was thinking about Alice in Wonderland, that story, right, where she's at the wedding, she's about to get married, right, about to live into social convention, and she abandons the wedding and chases after a rabbit and then falls down the great rabbit hole. And if you remember the visuals in that story, I don't remember, I'm not sure I read the book, but the visuals of the story that Disney helps us to maintain in our memory is all these pieces of her life story and other stories are showing up for her as she falls down that tunnel, right? And the question is, what are you letting go of and hanging on to as you sort of drift deeper into life? And for Cole, he said, a couple of things. One, you're sort of attracted to hold on to those things that are kind of allow you to take the next couple of steps, or that resonate with your what you need at the moment, or where you're at in your life. And I think that's so true for all of us. In fact, for you, as you think about what are you paying attention to as you fall into this great gift of life, as you rest into it, knowing what it is that's allowing you a sense of inner peace, or capacity for connection or insight or wonder, is an important tool to kind of hang on to say, I'm going to pay attention to for a little bit longer. Last week when we shared, one person shared that what helps them kind of sort through what they need is looking for things that help me to feel alive inside, to be truly grateful, to somehow feel like I am in the flow of life, that you're a participant in this flow. Those things help her to navigate. Another talked about finding things that allow her a calm presence in the moment, that allows her to be in the moment. Knowing your sort of strategy helps you to hang on to all the stories, but to leverage them in a way that sort of speak meaningfully to you. And Cole clearly understood that as he thought about his own journey. The other thing that I thought he shared that was so beautiful is that the goal of that journey is not to avoid suffering. That there will be times of great joy along the way, and happiness and clarity, and there will be suffering. And that suffering is just part of the seasons of life. In fact, at one point he quoted, I can't remember who it was who said, it was a piece from Thoreau, that the goal is to live into the seasons of life. Right? If you're living into winter, if winter is where you're at, you're going to live into winter. If it's spring, live into spring. Live into all of these seasons, right? And for Cole, his notion that these moments that are filled with levels of suffering are places where new things, insights, new awareness, those are the birthing places for those. In fact, he had a line that I think speaks to my reality as well, when he said, sometimes you can't quite tell whether you're on the verge of a nervous breakdown or some sort of spiritual awakening. That, isn't that the truth, right? There's this fuzzy area that you feel like, oh my God, things are just falling apart. And then something births its way out of it and you realize you've got this epiphany moment. That's just so true. That how do you feel comfortable to allow yourself to move more slowly through this dropping into the gift of life, that doesn't feel like a panicked rout. It really feels like a way to kind of open yourself up to all that life can bring, so that you can then cast yourself forward into the next moment that's inviting you in a way that's connected to the stories that matter. For both of these folks, for Cole and for John, both were clearly aware that the point of their life was not to simply arrive at a destination, but to always be connected to this, what would you maybe even call it, evolving or growing capacity for awareness and deeper understanding and acceptance and even self-forgiveness, stumbling along the way and then taking a next step forward, for managing the seasons, the flow of life, connected to the many stories and to each other along the way. Both of them understood the dynamics of that. In fact, for Cole, he said, he feared, which was a great language for this, he feared kind of falling into an answer, right? I don't want to fall into the trap of finding an answer, because he was aware at his early age that there is this power of knowing that you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know. So there's this kind of open forever journey that's percolating underneath the surface for Cole at 21 and even still for John at 87. That he's open to learning something new, being open to allowing his connection to invite him into another layer of wonder or gratitude or awe. I don't know about you, but from my perspective, these stories are an amazing way for us to collectively tend to how spirit or the gift of life kind of stirs in our time. And it reminds me of the poem that we started with, right? Let's meet. Let's meet at the confluence where you flow into me and one breath swirls between our lungs. For one instant to dwell in the presence of the galaxies, for one instant to live the truth of the heart, that this entire traveling cosmos is the secret one, slowly growing a body. How are you participating in the slow evolving body that you've been gifted with? How are you participating in the slow evolving body that is the collective body? Are you feeling connected to your own little journey? Are you feeling connected to this journey we share, despite and within all the suffering that we are clearly aware of, all the potential for joy and gratitude and wonder that's there too? That is the season in which we find ourselves. How can we live so fully into that? For you, my hope is that you can not find your way, but be present for that process with a gentle heart, right? Open to trusting that your soul's journey matters to all of us, right? I tell you, it's so important that I do the work that I do and that you do the work that you do, because we're tethered to each other along this journey. And for me to hear you out as you move through or in or between all of this, and for you to hear me, whew, that matters a lot. John would say, people show up to collect bottle caps or play cards or baseball or even go to church because they really long to have a community that they know is connected to them, right? That they can experience that connection one to another. I know this is a digital universe, but let's try to stay connected as well. All right? Okay, I think that's it for today. I have my deep gratitude to both Cole and John for sharing their stories with us. Like I said, this week as I move forward, I'm going to put together a podcast so you can actually hear them talk about this stuff. And I just need some help doing that. My technological skills are not so strong these days. So I'm going to get some help and support doing that along the way. And then next week when we gather, I have another interview coming up this week with a woman who really focuses in on kind of the role, and I know this sounds a little bit morbid, but sort of the role, the experience of being close to death can bring to us, and how the awareness of life and death, how it plays together, how she articulates that in a way that helps give her a stronger sense of connection and wholeness. So I'm going to use her story a little bit next week and then follow up as well on sort of some of John's perspectives on practices that allow us to explore the window of what it means to enter more fully into our connection with one another. So that's coming up next week. All right. So I hope you'll join us. Thank you for being a part of this morning as we collectively try to find our way gently, slowly, in the seasons that hold us. Be well.